The Monday after the leadership meeting began like any other. Natalie arrived at Sullivan Global Holdings just before 8 o'clock, greeted the security guards by name, and headed to her desk with a cup of coffee in one hand and her planner in the other. She smiled as she passed Karen. "Morning." "Morning, superstar," Karen teased. Natalie laughed. "If you keep calling me that, I'm going to start hiding from you." Karen grinned. "I can't help it. Ever since the leadership meeting, everyone knows your name." Natalie shook her head. "I'd rather they remember the company's success than mine." Karen smiled. "That's exactly why people respect you." Across town, Brandon Cole walked into the headquarters of Preston and Blake Financial Group. He had barely reached his office when his manager, Charles Whitmore, called him into a meeting. "Close the door, Brandon." Brandon obeyed. Charles placed a business magazine on the desk. "I need you to review this." Brandon looked down. The cover featured an article about Sullivan Global Holdings and its recent expansion. Beneath the headline was a large photograph. His heart stopped. Standing beside Adrian Sullivan on a stage was Natalie. She was smiling confidently while holding an award. The caption read, "CEO Adrian Sullivan recognizes rising employee Natalie Hayes for innovative strategy behind multi-million-dollar partnership." Brandon stared at the page in disbelief. "This can't be." Charles noticed his reaction. "You know her?" Brandon swallowed hard. "She's my ex-wife." Charles looked surprised. "Seriously?" Brandon nodded silently. Charles leaned back in his chair. "Well, she's making quite a name for herself." Brandon couldn't take his eyes off the magazine. The woman in the photograph looked completely different. Not because of her clothes. Not because of her hairstyle. Because of the confidence in her eyes. It was a confidence he had never noticed before. Or perhaps one he had never allowed her to have. Later that afternoon, Brandon couldn't stop thinking about the article. During lunch, he searched Sullivan Global Holdings online. There it was again. Photos from the leadership meeting. A company newsletter praising Natalie's contribution. Comments from employees congratulating her. Everywhere he looked, people admired the woman he had dismissed as not ambitious enough. He leaned back in his chair. "What have I done?" he whispered. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. "Where are you?" "We have dinner reservations at 7. Brandon stared at the message. For the first time in months, he wasn't excited to see her. That evening, he arrived at the upscale restaurant nearly 20 minutes late. Vanessa frowned as he sat down. "You're late." "Sorry. You've been distracted all day." Brandon forced a smile. "Just work." Vanessa studied him carefully. "Does this have anything to do with your ex-wife?" Brandon looked up, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "I saw the article too." She reached into her purse and placed the same business magazine on the table. "I didn't realize she'd become such a big deal." Brandon remained silent. Vanessa folded her arms. "I thought you said she wasn't interested in business." "So did I." She leaned forward. "Don't tell me you're regretting your decision." Brandon quickly shook his head. "No." But his answer came a little too quickly. A little too defensively. Vanessa noticed. "You are." "I'm not." "Then stop talking about her." "I haven't been talking about her." "You've been thinking about her." Brandon had no response. Vanessa sighed and picked up her menu. "I hope you're not forgetting why you left." Brandon nodded absent-mindedly. But deep down, he couldn't stop remembering. He remembered Natalie working late to help pay his tuition. He remembered the nights she stayed awake encouraging him before important presentations. He remembered every sacrifice she had made without asking for anything in return. And for the first time, He began to wonder whether success had cost him the one person who had loved him unconditionally. Meanwhile, across the city, Natalie was at Aunt Margaret's cottage, laughing as they baked another batch of cinnamon rolls together. She had no idea that the man who had once broken her heart had just begun to realize the true value of everything he had thrown away. A month passed, and Sullivan Global Holdings continued to thrive. The client loyalty strategy Natalie had helped develop was exceeding expectations. New partnerships were being signed, existing clients were renewing long-term contracts, and employee morale was at an all-time high. For Natalie, life finally felt peaceful. She still missed the years she had lost, but she no longer woke up thinking about Brandon. She had learned that healing didn't happen all at once. It happened one day, one choice, and one small victory at a time. Across town, however, things were beginning to fall apart for Brandon. Preston and Blake Financial Group had just lost another major client. The atmosphere inside the office was tense as department heads gathered for an emergency meeting. Charles Whitmore stood at the front of the conference room with a grim expression. "This is the third major account we've lost in 2 months." No one spoke. Charles continued. "Our clients say they no longer feel valued. They claim we're focused on profits instead of relationships." Brandon shifted uneasily in his chair. Those words sounded strangely familiar. He remembered reading about Sullivan Global's new customer-first strategy, the very idea Natalie had proposed. Charles looked around the room. "We need solutions, not excuses." Several managers offered suggestions, but none seemed convincing. The meeting ended without a clear plan. As everyone filed out, Charles stopped Brandon. "Stay for a moment." Brandon closed the door behind the others. Charles folded his arms. "You've been distracted lately." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." Brandon looked away. "I've noticed mistakes in your reports. I'll fix them. This isn't just about paperwork." Charles sighed. "You used to be one of our strongest managers." He paused. "What's changed?" Brandon opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could he explain that the woman he had dismissed was now succeeding in ways he never expected? That every article about Sullivan Global reminded him of what he had lost? Charles finally said, "Get yourself back on track, Brandon. We can't afford any more setbacks." "I understand." That evening, Brandon arrived at the luxury apartment he shared with Vanessa. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Without looking up, she asked, "Bad day?" "The worst." She shrugged. "It happens. I almost got blamed for losing another client." Vanessa finally looked at him. "Then work harder." Brandon stared at her. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know, maybe ask if I'm okay." Vanessa laughed lightly. "We're adults, Brandon." He felt a wave of disappointment. When he had bad days years ago, Natalie would stay up late making his favorite dinner. She would encourage him, remind him of his strengths, and never let him face his problems alone. Vanessa simply picked up her phone again. "I have a spa appointment tomorrow. Don't forget we're meeting my friends Friday night." Brandon nodded quietly. As he walked into the bedroom, the apartment felt strangely empty. It was beautiful. Expensive. Modern. But it didn't feel like home. The next morning, Natalie arrived at Sullivan Global early as usual. She found Adrian already in the office reviewing financial reports. "Good morning," she said. He smiled. "You're early." "So are you." "I couldn't sleep." She noticed several folders spread across his desk. "Big project?" He nodded. "We're considering expanding into 2 new states." Natalie looked at the reports. "If the expansion goes through, you'll need stronger local partnerships." Adrian looked up. "Interesting." She pointed to one of the maps. "Building trust with local businesses before opening new offices could make the transition much smoother." Adrian smiled. You always seem to find the human side of every business decision. Natalie shrugged. Businesses grow because people trust them. He nodded thoughtfully. And that's exactly why I value your perspective. Natalie smiled, feeling a quiet sense of pride. She no longer questioned whether she belonged in this world. She knew she did. Meanwhile, miles away, Brandon sat alone in his office, staring at another disappointing sales report. For the first time in his career, he wasn't climbing higher. He was watching everything he'd worked for slowly begin to slip through his fingers. And deep inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost far more than just a successful marriage. He had lost the person who had always brought out the best in him. The tension inside Brandon's office grew heavier with each passing week. Another important client had ended their contract, and senior management demanded answers. Brandon sat behind his desk, staring at the resignation letter of one of his best employees. He rubbed his temples, trying to ease the pounding headache that had become a daily companion. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Vanessa walked in, dressed in an elegant navy suit. "Ready for lunch?" she asked. Brandon barely looked up. "I can't. I have too much work." Vanessa frowned. "You've been saying that a lot lately." "I have deadlines." She sighed dramatically. "Fine." As she turned to leave, Brandon stopped her. "Vanessa." She looked back. "Can you stay for a minute?" Reluctantly, she sat across from his desk. "I've been under a lot of pressure lately," Brandon admitted. "I could really use someone to talk to." Vanessa glanced at her watch. "I only have 10 minutes. Brandon's shoulders slumped. 10 minutes. That was all she could spare. He remembered nights when Natalie had stayed awake until 2 a.m. just to comfort him before a major presentation. She had never looked at the clock. She had simply been there. Vanessa stood up. "I have another meeting." Without another word, she walked out. Brandon leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time, he admitted something to himself. He missed being loved. Not admired. Not envied. Loved. Later that evening, Vanessa met a group of friends at an upscale rooftop restaurant. She didn't know Brandon had decided to surprise her with dinner. As he stepped out of the elevator, he heard her laughing. He stopped before she noticed him. "I don't know why Brandon is so stressed all the time," Vanessa said, taking a sip of her drink. One of her friends smirked. "I thought he was your dream man." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "He was, when his career was taking off." The women laughed. Another friend leaned forward. "So why are you still with him?" Vanessa shrugged. "I'm waiting to see if he gets promoted this year." "And if he doesn't?" She smiled coldly. "Then I'll find someone who will." Brandon felt the blood drain from his face. His heart pounded as every word sank in. Another friend asked, "Did you ever actually love him?" Vanessa laughed. "Love?" She shook her head. "I liked the lifestyle." The table erupted in laughter. Brandon stood frozen. The woman he had sacrificed everything for. The woman he believed understood him. Had never truly cared about him. Quietly, he turned around and walked back to the elevator before anyone saw him. Meanwhile, across the city, Natalie was finishing another successful day at Sullivan Global Holdings. As she packed her bag, Adrian walked over. "Do you have plans this evening?" Natalie smiled. "Just dinner with Aunt Margaret." "She's lucky." Natalie laughed. "I think I'm the lucky one." Adrian nodded. "Family like that is rare." "It is." He hesitated for a moment. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Natalie looked curious. "What is it?" "Next Saturday, the company is sponsoring a charity fundraiser for children's education." She nodded. "I'll be there if you need volunteers." "I was actually hoping you'd attend as my guest." Natalie's eyes widened. "As your guest?" Adrian smiled warmly. You've worked incredibly hard these past few months. I thought it would be nice for you to enjoy an evening without thinking about reports and meetings. Natalie hesitated. She had never attended an event like that. I don't know if I'd fit in. Adrian shook his head. Natalie, you belong wherever your kindness, intelligence, and integrity take you. His words touched her deeply. After a moment, she smiled. I'd love to come. I'm glad. As Adrian walked away, Karen hurried over with an excited grin. Did the CEO just invite you to the charity gala? Natalie nodded. I think so. Karen laughed. Trust me, everyone will be talking about this tomorrow. Natalie smiled nervously. She had no idea that the charity gala would become the evening that changed her relationship with Adrian forever. At the same time, Brandon sat alone in his dark apartment. Vanessa hadn't come home. For the first time, he saw the truth with painful clarity. He had traded genuine love for empty appearances. And now, he was completely alone. The charity gala was only a few days away, but Sullivan Global Holdings had another reason to celebrate. The client loyalty initiative had exceeded every projection. Customer retention had reached a record high, profits had increased, and the company's expansion plans were moving ahead faster than expected. On Monday morning, Adrian called an executive meeting. Department heads filled the boardroom, curious about the unexpected announcement. Natalie entered quietly with her notebook, expecting to record another routine meeting. She took her usual seat near the back. Adrian stood and smiled at everyone. Before we discuss this quarter's results, I'd like to recognize someone whose contributions have had a remarkable impact on this company. Natalie kept writing, assuming he was referring to one of the senior executives. Instead, Adrian looked directly at her. Ms. Hayes, would you join us at the front, please? Natalie's eyes widened. Me? Yes. She slowly stood and walked to the front of the room. The executives watched with curiosity. Adrian folded his hands. When Natalie joined Sullivan Global, she was hired as our executive operations coordinator. He paused. In just a few months, she has helped secure major contracts, strengthened client relationships, improved internal operations, and consistently demonstrated exceptional leadership. Robert Jenkins nodded in agreement. I couldn't have said it better. Linda Morales smiled. She's become one of the most valuable people in this company. Natalie looked around the room, overwhelmed. Adrian continued. Leadership isn't measured by job titles. It's measured by character, judgment, and the ability to inspire others. He picked up a blue folder from the conference table. Effective immediately. He smiled. I'd like to offer Natalie Hayes the position of Director of Strategic Development. The room erupted into applause. Natalie stood frozen. I'm sorry. She blinked several times. Did you say director? Adrian nodded. I did. Her voice trembled. But I've only been here a few months. Robert chuckled. And you've accomplished more in those few months than some people do in years. Linda added, this promotion has the unanimous support of the executive team. Natalie looked down at the folder in her hands. She had never imagined rising so quickly. I don't know what to say. Adrian smiled warmly. Say yes. The room laughed softly. Natalie took a deep breath. I accept. Applause filled the boardroom once again. Karen wiped away a happy tear. She deserves every bit of this, she whispered. Even Melissa smiled as she clapped. The jealousy she had once felt had been replaced with genuine respect. After the meeting, employees gathered outside Natalie's new office. Flowers arrived from several departments. Cards of congratulations covered her desk. One card caught her attention. It wasn't signed. It simply read, never stop believing in yourself. The world is finally seeing what was always there. Natalie smiled as she folded the note and placed it in her desk drawer. That afternoon, Adrian knocked on the open door of her new office. Settling in? Natalie laughed. I'm still trying to believe this is real. It is. She looked around the spacious office with its large windows overlooking the Seattle skyline. I've never even had an office before. Adrian smiled. You've earned it. She looked at him gratefully. I don't know how I'll ever thank you. You already have. She looked confused. How? By proving that taking a chance on you was one of the best decisions I've ever made. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Respect had grown into friendship. And friendship was quietly becoming something neither of them had expected. As Adrian left the office, he glanced back once. Natalie was standing by the window, smiling as she looked out over the city. For the first time in years. She wasn't looking back at the life she had lost. She was looking forward to the life she was building. Little did she know, someone else had just learned about her promotion. And the news would leave him speechless. Natalie's promotion to Director of Strategic Development became the biggest topic of conversation at Sullivan Global Holdings. Some employees celebrated her success. Others quietly questioned it. By Tuesday morning, whispers echoed through the hallways. Did you hear she became a director in less than 6 months? That's almost impossible. The CEO must really like her. I heard he invited her to the charity gala too. The rumor spread faster than anyone expected. Natalie noticed the sudden silence whenever she entered a room. Co-workers who used to greet her warmly now exchanged curious glances before looking away. She pretended not to notice. But every whisper stung. That afternoon, Natalie walked into the executive lounge to grab a cup of coffee. She stopped just outside the doorway when she heard familiar voices. I don't care how talented she is, one employee whispered. People don't get promoted that fast. There has to be something going on between her and Mr. Sullivan. Another voice laughed. Maybe that's the real reason she keeps getting all the important projects. Natalie's heart sank. She quietly stepped away before anyone realized she had heard them. For a moment, the old Natalie resurfaced. The woman who doubted herself. The woman who believed she wasn't good enough. She returned to her office, closed the door, and stared out the window. Maybe they're right, she whispered. What if everyone thinks I don't deserve this? A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Karen stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. I thought you could use a break. Natalie forced a smile. Thanks. Karen studied her face. Something's wrong. Natalie hesitated before answering. I heard people talking. Karen sighed. I was afraid of that. They think my promotion has nothing to do with my work. Karen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Natalie, people often invent stories when they can't explain someone else's success. But it still hurts. I know. Karen smiled gently. Just remember, the people who actually work with you know the truth. Later that day, Adrian received an email from Human Resources. Several anonymous complaints claimed that Natalie's promotion had shown favoritism. He calmly read every word before closing his laptop. Instead of becoming angry, he called an executive meeting. Within an hour, every department head was seated in the boardroom. Natalie had no idea why she had been asked to attend. She quietly took her seat. Adrian stood. I've received concerns regarding our recent promotion. The room became silent. He continued. I want to address those concerns openly. He looked toward Linda Morales. Linda, who recommended Natalie for promotion? Linda answered without hesitation. I did. Adrian nodded. Robert? Robert smiled. I strongly supported it. Adrian looked around the room. And who approved the decision? Every executive raised a hand. It was unanimous. Natalie looked around in surprise. She hadn't known that. Adrian continued. For the record. He placed several reports on the conference table. These are the performance evaluations, project results, client testimonials, and financial reports connected to Natalie's work. He paused. Every promotion at Sullivan Global is based on merit. His voice grew firmer. Not friendship. Not favoritism. And certainly not gossip. The room remained silent. If anyone believes otherwise, my door is always open. No one spoke. Because the evidence spoke for itself. After the meeting, Natalie remained behind. She looked at Adrian. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I don't want you dealing with rumors because of me. Adrian smiled kindly. I'm not defending you because you're my employee. She looked puzzled. I'm defending you because it's the truth. He stepped closer. You earned every opportunity. You earned every promotion. And no rumor will ever change that. Natalie felt tears welling in her eyes. For a while, I started wondering if maybe I really didn't deserve any of this. Adrian shook his head. Never let people who haven't walked your journey tell you what you deserve. His words settled deep in her heart. She smiled. Thank you. As she left the boardroom, she felt lighter. The rumors hadn't disappeared overnight. But they no longer had the power to shake her confidence. Because the people whose opinions truly mattered had already spoken. And they believed in her. Outside the boardroom, Melissa watched Natalie walk past. For the first time, she realized something important. People could question Natalie's success. But no one could question her integrity. And that was something money, titles, or jealousy could never buy. The rumors surrounding Natalie's promotion slowly faded, but she knew some people were still watching her closely. Every decision she made seemed to be examined. Every success was questioned. Instead of letting the pressure discourage her, Natalie made a promise to herself. I won't waste my energy proving people wrong. I'll spend it proving myself right. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Early Monday morning, Adrian called Natalie into his office. When she arrived, Robert Jenkins and Linda Morales were already there. A large map of the United States was displayed on the conference room screen. Adrian smiled as Natalie entered. Good morning, Natalie. Good morning. He gestured toward the map. We've decided to move forward with expanding Sullivan Global into 2 new states. Natalie nodded. Congratulations. Adrian continued. We need someone to lead the market research, negotiate with local partners, and coordinate the launch strategy. Natalie listened carefully. This project will determine whether our expansion succeeds or fails. Robert folded his arms. It's one of the biggest projects we've handled this year. Adrian looked directly at Natalie. We'd like you to lead it. Natalie blinked in surprise. Me? Linda smiled. You've earned our confidence. Natalie hesitated. This is a huge responsibility. It is, Adrian replied. But we believe you're the right person. After a deep breath, Natalie nodded. I won't let you down. For the next several weeks, Natalie poured herself into the project. She researched local markets late into the evening. She held virtual meetings with community business leaders. She visited potential office locations and carefully reviewed every contract before signing. Rather than rushing the process, she took time to understand each community. She believed successful businesses didn't just open offices. They built relationships. Her approach impressed everyone she worked with. One afternoon, while visiting a small family-owned logistics company, the owner smiled warmly. Most executives come in talking about profits. He shook Natalie's hand. You were the first person who asked about our employees. Natalie smiled. People are the heart of every business. The owner nodded. I'd be honored to work with Sullivan Global. Back at headquarters, Adrian reviewed the weekly progress reports. Every milestone had been completed ahead of schedule. Every budget remained under control. Every partner spoke highly of Natalie. Robert walked into Adrian's office carrying another report. "I've never seen anyone build trust this quickly." Adrian smiled. "Neither have I." Robert looked thoughtful. "She's changing the way people think about leadership." Adrian nodded. "Leadership isn't about having the loudest voice." He looked at Natalie's report. "It's about earning people's confidence." A month later, the executive board gathered to review the final expansion proposal. Natalie stood at the front of the conference room, confidently presenting months of research. She answered difficult questions with calm professionalism. She explained financial forecasts without hesitation. She outlined long-term strategies with remarkable clarity. When she finished, the room fell silent. Then, the board members began applauding. Linda smiled proudly. "Outstanding work." Robert nodded. "I vote that we approve the expansion immediately." One by one, every board member agreed. The proposal passed unanimously. As the meeting ended, one of the senior executives approached Natalie. "I'll admit something." Natalie looked at him. "When you were promoted, I wasn't sure you were ready." He smiled warmly. "I was wrong." Natalie extended her hand. "Thank you." He shook it firmly. "You've earned every bit of your success." That evening, Adrian stood outside Natalie's office. "You have a minute?" "Of course." He stepped inside. "I just wanted to congratulate you." "Thank you." He smiled. "Do you remember what you told me on your first day?" Natalie thought for a moment. "Someone has to find the solution?" Adrian laughed. "Exactly." He looked around her office. "You've spent months finding solutions." He paused. "And today, you proved something much more important." Natalie tilted her head. "What's that?" "You proved you never needed anyone's approval. You already belonged here." Natalie smiled, feeling a quiet sense of pride. For the first time in years, she truly believed it. As Adrian left her office, he couldn't help but admire not only her intelligence, but the strength, humility, and kindness that made her unlike anyone he had ever met. And without either of them realizing it, their lives were drawing closer with every passing day. 3 months later, the annual Northwest Business Leadership Summit brought together some of the most influential business leaders from across the country. CEOs, investors, entrepreneurs, and executives gathered at the luxurious Emerald Convention Center in downtown Seattle. Sullivan Global Holdings had been invited as one of the keynote companies because of its remarkable growth and successful expansion. Adrian Sullivan would deliver the opening address. To everyone's surprise, another speaker had also been added to the program. Natalie Hayes. When Karen told her the news, Natalie nearly dropped the folder she was holding. "Me? Speak at the summit?" Karen laughed. "You've earned it." Natalie shook her head. "I've never spoken in front of hundreds of business leaders." "You'll do just fine." Meanwhile, across the city, Brandon received an invitation from his company to attend the same conference. His manager, Charles Whitmore, handed him the event schedule. "We're hoping to build relationships with potential partners." Brandon glanced through the program. His eyes stopped on one name. Guest speaker, Natalie Hayes, Director of Strategic Development, Sullivan Global Holdings. He blinked. There had to be another Natalie Hayes. There was no way. He read it again. It was her. The woman he had once told she didn't belong in the corporate world. The morning of the conference arrived. The grand ballroom buzzed with conversation as hundreds of guests took their seats. Brandon sat near the middle of the room with several coworkers. "I hear Sullivan Global has been incredible this year," one colleague whispered. "They've become the company everyone wants to work with." Brandon forced a smile. "So I've heard." The lights dimmed. Adrian walked onto the stage first. The audience applauded enthusiastically. He delivered an inspiring presentation about ethical leadership, innovation, and building trust with customers. As he concluded, he smiled at the audience. Success is never achieved alone. He paused. I'd now like to introduce someone whose insight has helped shape many of the strategies we've discussed today. Brandon's heartbeat quickened. The Director of Strategic Development at Sullivan Global Holdings. Adrian smiled proudly. Ms. Natalie Hayes. The room erupted into applause. Brandon slowly looked toward the stage. Natalie walked confidently to the podium in an elegant emerald green business suit. She looked poised. Confident. Nothing like the uncertain woman who had stood crying in their living room months earlier. She smiled warmly at the audience. Good morning, everyone. Her voice was calm and steady. I'd like to begin by sharing a lesson I learned the hard way. The ballroom became silent. Many people believe success begins with talent. She shook her head gently. I believe it begins with believing that your voice matters. Brandon couldn't take his eyes off her. She spoke about teamwork. About resilience. About earning trust instead of demanding respect. She shared stories of businesses that succeeded because they listened to people rather than chasing profits alone. By the time she finished, the audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation filled the ballroom. Brandon remained frozen in his seat. He had never seen Natalie like this. He had never imagined she possessed such confidence, intelligence, and grace. As she stepped away from the podium, Adrian greeted her with a warm smile and a congratulatory handshake. The photographers captured the moment. From where Brandon sat, it was impossible not to notice the admiration Adrian had for her. One of Brandon's coworkers leaned over. She's impressive. Another nodded. No wonder Sullivan Global is growing so fast. A third colleague added, if they ever offered me a job, I'd accept without thinking twice. Brandon swallowed hard. For the first time since the divorce, regret settled deep in his heart. He remembered every cruel word he had spoken. You don't fit into my world anymore. Now, as he watched Natalie surrounded by applause from some of the country's most successful business leaders, he realized the painful truth. She had never failed to fit into his world. He had simply failed to recognize her worth. As the conference broke for lunch, Brandon made a decision. He was going to speak to Natalie. No matter how difficult that conversation might be. As the audience left the ballroom for the lunch break, dozens of business leaders surrounded Natalie. Excellent presentation. Your customer-first strategy was inspiring. I'd love to discuss a future partnership. Natalie smiled politely, shaking hands and thanking everyone for their kind words. She still found it hard to believe all this attention was directed at her. A few feet away, Adrian watched the scene with quiet pride. Robert walked over and smiled. You were right about her. Adrian glanced toward Natalie. I never doubted what she was capable of. Brandon stood near the entrance of the ballroom, watching from a distance. His heart pounded. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, every word had disappeared. He took a deep breath and walked toward her. Natalie. She turned at the sound of her name. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled politely. Hello, Brandon. There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just calm courtesy. Your presentation. Brandon said awkwardly. It was incredible. Thank you. I had no idea you were capable of speaking like that. Natalie smiled gently. I didn't know either. He looked at her for a long moment. You've changed. She nodded. I've grown. Brandon lowered his eyes. I guess I never really saw how talented you were. Natalie remained silent. I've been thinking about us. She looked at him without saying a word. I made a lot of mistakes. A soft sigh escaped her lips. Yes, you did. Brandon swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, Natalie shook her head. This isn't about forgiveness. He looked confused. It's about acceptance. She smiled sadly. I've accepted that our marriage ended. Those words hit Brandon harder than he expected. I've also accepted that some people are only meant to be part of one chapter of our lives. He felt his chest tighten. I wish I could change everything. So do I. Hope flickered across his face. Before he could speak, Natalie continued. I wish you had believed in me when I still needed you. The hope disappeared. Her words were calm. Gentle. But they carried the weight of years of sacrifice. You were the person whose opinion mattered most to me. She paused. When you told me I wasn't enough. She looked away for a moment. I believed you. Brandon felt tears sting his eyes. I was wrong. I know. And I'm sorry. Natalie nodded. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do? I do. She smiled kindly. But an apology doesn't erase what happened. Brandon couldn't argue with that. Before either of them could speak again, Adrian approached. Natalie. She turned with a warm smile. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. He noticed Brandon standing nearby. Good afternoon. Brandon extended his hand. Brandon Cole. Adrian Sullivan. The two men shook hands. I enjoyed your presentation, Brandon said politely. Thank you, Adrian replied. He looked at Natalie. The investors from Portland would like to meet you before the afternoon session. I'll be right there. She turned back to Brandon. It was nice seeing you. You too. Natalie walked away beside Adrian. As they crossed the ballroom together, several executives greeted them. Many assumed they were attending the conference as a team. Brandon watched silently. For the first time, he saw something he had never noticed before. Adrian didn't interrupt Natalie. He listened. When she spoke, he paid attention. When others congratulated her, he encouraged them. He treated her like an equal. Not someone standing behind him, but someone standing beside him. Brandon lowered his head. Years ago. That was exactly how Natalie had deserved to be treated. And he had failed to give her that. As he stood alone in the crowded ballroom, one painful realization settled into his heart. The woman he had underestimated had become someone the entire business world respected. And he was no longer the man privileged enough to walk beside her. The business summit ended just before sunset. Executives and business leaders slowly made their way toward the grand ballroom for the networking reception. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead as waiters moved through the crowd carrying trays of appetizers and champagne. Natalie stood near one of the large windows overlooking Seattle's skyline, chatting with investors who wanted to learn more about Sullivan Global's expansion plans. She had never imagined herself standing in a room like this. Just a few months ago, she had been wondering how she would pay next month's rent. Now, people wanted to hear her ideas. As the conversation ended, she excused herself and stepped onto the quiet balcony for a moment of fresh air. The cool evening breeze brushed against her face. You always liked sunsets. Natalie slowly turned. Brandon stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets. For a moment, neither of them spoke. I wasn't trying to interrupt you, he said quietly. I just hoped we could talk, one last time. Natalie nodded politely. We can talk. Brandon stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. I've spent months thinking about everything. So have I. I've replayed that night over and over. Natalie lowered her eyes. So have I. He sighed heavily. I don't recognize the man I became. She looked at him calmly. Neither do I. Brandon's voice cracked. I was selfish. I let success convince me I didn't need the people who helped me get there. Natalie remained silent. I thought I wanted a different life. He gave a bitter laugh. I didn't realize I was throwing away the best part of my life. Natalie looked toward the city lights. You know what hurt the most? Brandon shook his head. It wasn't the divorce. It wasn't even Vanessa. She looked back at him. It was hearing the man I loved say I wasn't good enough. Brandon closed his eyes. I know. 4 months. Natalie's voice trembled slightly. I believed those words. I questioned everything about myself. I stopped believing I had anything valuable to offer. Tears filled Brandon's eyes. I'm so sorry. I know you are. She smiled sadly. But apologies can't erase memories. Brandon swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve another chance. Natalie said nothing. But if there is even the smallest possibility. He paused, struggling to speak. I'd spend the rest of my life proving how sorry I am. Natalie looked at him with compassion. There was no anger in her heart anymore. Only peace. Brandon. She spoke softly. I forgave you a long time ago. Hope flashed across his face. Then she continued. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back. His hopeful expression slowly faded. I'll always appreciate the good memories we shared. She smiled gently. They helped shape the woman I've become. But that chapter of my life is over. Brandon lowered his head. I understand. I truly hope you find happiness. She paused. But it won't be with me. The words were gentle. Yet final. Brandon wiped away a tear. I suppose this is goodbye. Natalie smiled warmly. No. She extended her hand. This is thank you. He looked confused. Thank you? Thank you for teaching me something I never understood before. What was that? She looked him in the eyes. My worth was never determined by whether someone chose me. It was always there. Brandon slowly took her hand. For the first time in many months. He realized she no longer needed his approval. She had found something far more important. She had found herself. At that moment, Adrian stepped onto the balcony. He had been looking for Natalie before the reception resumed. There you are, he said with a warm smile. Natalie turned. I was just coming back. Adrian noticed Brandon and greeted him politely. Mr. Cole. Mr. Sullivan. The two men shook hands. Adrian looked at Natalie. The investors from Boston are asking for you. She smiled. I'll be right there. Before leaving, Natalie looked at Brandon one final time. I wish you peace. Then she walked away beside Adrian. Brandon remained alone on the balcony, watching them disappear into the ballroom. The woman he had once believed would never succeed without him had just shown him that she never needed him to become extraordinary. She had only needed someone who believed in her. And that was a lesson he had learned far too late.